I know. You're already looking at the title of this video and already ready to type out a massive argument in the comments citing all the reasons why Aki Izoi's Season 2 arc was badly handled, and probably something mean about me as a person for even putting this out. As good as that would be for the YouTube algorithm, which, speaking of, hey, leave a like and subscribe. However, I do want to address some things which I already know are an issue. To start, I am aware that Izaoi's desire to learn how to do writing duels comes from a place of sexism, in which Sherry LeBlanc comes off as being introduced purely to induce jealousy in Izaoi. This causes her to doubt her relationship with Yusei Fudo and is the catalyst for Izoi deciding to learn how to do writing duels themselves. This is further harmed by LeBlanc's bare-bones development, and I'll further discuss the upsides of this later, but I do agree that it leaves a sour taste in one's mouth. The second, of course, is the losing her powers and the coma that comes immediately afterwards. I will briefly touch on the losing her powers plot point later, but I do concede that the coma was wholly unnecessary, especially considering the fact that both Crow Hogan and Jack Atlas have nastier accidents that do not cause them to fall into a 3-episode long coma. And before you jump in my comments, no, this had nothing to do with the voice actress's pregnancy, as the voice actress would not become pregnant with her first child until after the show had concluded. Third is the lackluster duels written for her in Season 2 compared to her Season 1 duels, which really extends to almost every character too. Lua and Luca, for example, do not win against Luciano. Atlas's prior win record is reduced to rubble in a single episode. Hogan is given very few chances to shine. All of LeBlanc's wins occur off-screen, and Bruno is a plot device for Fudo to become stronger. Izoi actually got off fairly light considering how many characters are pushed aside during the World Racing Grand Prix arc. Finally, a lot of people claim that the ending for Izoi and the 3 episodes I consider non-canon to be a fitting end. I've seen suggestions that this ending is good because it puts her entire Black Witch persona to bed. Here's the problem with that claim. Izoi's Dark Signer arc already was about her distancing herself from the Black Rose Witch persona. The Black Rose Witch persona was Izoi's coping mechanism to deal with the fact that she unintentionally was harming others, that she could not control her powers. In the Dark Signer arc, this was a massive thing that was already addressed, in which she did not feel she was able to become friends with anyone. Again, this arc regarding it was wrapped up the minute Fudo was able to pull Izoi out of the induced rage Divine put her in. The Black Rose Witch is no more, and Izoi was now able to open herself up for friendship. This means to really start with why Izoi's arc in Season 2 isn't the biggest problem 5D's second season, we have to go back to Season 1 and really examine Izoi's arc. I do feel like Izoi's arc is just so rich and complex that it's very easy to miss subtleties in it on a first pass-through or even a second pass-through. It actually took me a few pass-throughs over this arc to actually put this script together. So a lot of people really do look at the first Fudo versus Izoi duel in the Fortune Cup for the start of Izoi's development, but there are in fact 2 duels Izoi did prior to her duel with Fudo. For the first duel, Izoi is pitted against a character named Jill Dillonsblue. However, we'll just call him Renfair Seto Kaiba, since in the dub he is played by the immaculate and talented Eric Stewart. Renfair Seto Kaiba is set up in a knight armor, claiming to be the knight that will slay the witch. You know, I did write this before I rewatched the duel, and while I was rewatching the duel, I know something else, and it's the fact that this particular Renfair Seto Kaiba just went and did not really want to duel her at first. He had this idea in his head of chivalry, and when he saw that it was Izoi, he was like, I can't duel a girl, and it's like, because it just kind of reminds me a little bit of how guys will typically see a girl duelist and they'll be like, oh, I'll go easy on you. And it's just, it doesn't feel good. And so, but he changes his tune relatively quickly once Jaeger tells him that Izoi is the Black Rose Witch. And Izoi spends most of the duel reining in her emotions, not once raising her voice beyond what is needed. She is a closed-off wall, refusing to engage with her opponent beyond the cards, wrote. This is unusual in a duel in the anime. In the Yu-Gi-Oh anime, duels are a way to see a character's thoughts and actions. It's the reason why Seto Kaiba rants at Yami Yugi during their duels. It's the reason why Yubel tells Jade and Yuki that they love him during a duel. It's why when Izoi says nothing during a duel, is very revealing to her character. Izoi is a closed-off woman who keeps her cards close to her chest, making her hard to read. During this duel, we are also reminded what Izoi thinks of the signer marks. When we first are introduced to her in episode 13, Izoi's mark is lighting up, and so is Yusei's. And the first thing she says to Yusei upon seeing his signer mark is that it is a detestable mark, and then she disappears. We'll get back to why that's an important detail later. Just remember that. This is also a good chance to really examine some similarities here. Izoi is acting much as Fudo did in his first duel, where Fudo also refused to reveal anything to his opponent. Much like Fudo, Izoi expresses disdain for her opponent and treats him as a nuisance rather than someone who has a genuine shot at beating her. Izoi's guarded emotions here are also similar to Fudo's, where neither are willing to let their walls crack. Izoi's powers are also on full display in this duel, in which Izoi has the power to harm her opponent. This is notable because Izoi actually expressed discomfort at the idea that she might do this, and will do so again a few times over the course of this tournament. Izoi's powers are also shown on full display in this duel, in which Izoi has the power to harm her opponent. This is notable because Izoi actually expressed discomfort at the idea she might do this, and will do so again a few times over the course of this tournament. Another thing to keep in mind, when she is asked who she is, Izoi responds, she then uses an equip spell to take control of Max Light level 3 and then pointedly remarks, this is actually the first time we see something that will foreshadow Izoi's past, as we later learn that Izoi feels betrayed by her father for rejecting her. This is a pain she's carried with her, and she's now projecting it onto Renfair Seto Kaiba. Renfair Seto Kaiba then accuses her of fighting evilly because no one in this anime can be normal about this card game. It is notable that Izoi does stop using Mark of the Rose after becoming good, which shows a growth in her character. Because you see, changing a mantra's allegiance in the anime is basically proof for evil. I'm not here to question the morality of the children's card game anime, I'm just here to analyze it. Anyway, Renfair Seto Kaiba then proclaims that he has a sword of justice and he will destroy Izoi with it. The entire time, Izoi's Black Garden has been the linchpin that will assure her victory. However, Renfair Seto Kaiba is short-sighted and doesn't read the cards like the rest of us, and destroys Doppelganger instead of Black Garden. Much like Fudo, Izoi survives on only 50 life points. You see, it's sort of a recurring thing where across all of Fudo's duels where he tends to win on less than 100 life points. Go ahead, take a look at his record. I'll wait. Anyway, the next turn, Izoi ends the duel. Renfair Seto Kaiba is assured in what Izoi will do, only for Izoi to utterly surprise him in her actions. You know who wasn't surprised by this move? Fudo, who has been watching Izoi's duel this entire time, and even accused of supporting her just a little too much. Another good point for later. Izoi then tells Renfair Seto Kaiba, this is the most Izoi has revealed all duel. And it shows that Izoi honestly believes herself to be on the side of justice here. And isn't that kind of interesting if you think about it? Because Izoi, as a character, has avoided revealing everything about herself up until now. But it sort of ties together with her stating that the mark of the Crimson Dragon is a detestable mark. Divine has pulled Izoi into the Arcadia movement, and so deep she sees no other way forward. Izoi wants justice, and she believes this is the way to do it. That's because everything that she's done so far has been under Divine's orders. The Black Rose Witch is Divine's weapon. And, okay, so you may have noticed that I haven't yet gotten to Season 2. That's because I need to start with something that people tend to overlook here. And it's that Izoi isn't a sadist. She isn't taking pleasure in this, despite what she might say. Whenever people examine this duel, the claim that Izoi enjoyed it comes up a lot. Izoi is expressionless the entire duel. The most emotion she shows is to tell Renfair Seto Kaiba is that his sense of justice is false. In Izoi's second duel, a profiler is chosen to duel her. He presents Izoi's past to us, but it's wrong. It's distorted and filtered through the bias of someone who doesn't see Izoi as human. He sees her as a monster who exists to just charge in and cause hurt and pain. And we must take this with a grain of salt. He tells us that Izoi was a monster from the beginning, but later we see Izoi's versions of events where Izoi as a child sobs and is terrified of her own powers. This is internally consistent with Izoi's final duel in the Fortune Cup, where Fudo seeks to know her heart. And now I'm going to say something controversial here. Fudo's first assessment of Izoi's enjoyment is wrong. He even later admits this in the same duel. Izoi is baffled by the statement and angered at the suggestion that she's enjoying this. After all, she is not a monster. She's not a sadist. She's not a monster. She is a purveyor of justice. This is how she truly sees herself. And Divine is taking advantage of her sense of justice in order to push her to follow his agenda. In one moment, we see the dichotomy between the slasher smile and the pain in Izoi's eyes. As a result, Izoi puts the mask on, unwilling to let Fudo prod her further and see the truth. She's content to let him think of her as a monster because it's so much easier than the truth. Over the course of the duel, the mask starts to break. Like, the first thing that breaks is the mouthpiece, and you see her smiling. But it hides the most important part, the eyes. The eyes that are the window to the soul. Over the course of this duel, we see her start to go from confident, assured, and by the end, Izoi is sobbing. Because she can no longer hide the truth, and it's that she's just a scared little girl. She's a scared, lonely little girl. And the duel ends with Izoi asking Fudo to help her. We see the fallout of this with Divine attempting to reassert control over Izoi. Izoi is, after all, the linchpin in all his plans, and he insists that Fudo cannot save her. And shortly after Divine attempts to reinstate this control, Izoi is confronted by Misty, and Misty winds up just destroying everything that Divine has done to try and turn her into a weapon. Because during this, Izoi defends to what she believes to be her home, her place of safety, the Arcadia building. And then the Arcadia building comes crumbling down. And as the Arcadia building crumples around her, Izoi watches Divine die. And this is when we get our first Izoi coma of the series. And I will say this one actually makes sense. Izoi was in a collapsed building. The shock and stress combined probably made it very difficult for her to fully remain on solid ground. This is when we get Hito's versions of events, and we finally see the pieces click together. And as I stated, what Hito tells us is that her powers were bigger than herself, and this is something she was exploited for. And again, this is part of a larger arc. During the Fortune Cup before his duel with Izoi, Fudo says,
この技は確実に俺たちをつないでいる。奴らはそれに気づき、俺たちを利用しようとしているのか。izayoiを取り巻くあの連中も結局シグナーとしての彼女。俺たちは利用されてはいけない。
Fudo and Izoi's parallels have meaning here, and it's even enhanced in the dub where Fudo winds up saying,
Because I know you!
You know who? The scared girl? Maybe the face behind the mask?
I know what it's like to be the outcast. I'm from the satellite. You think people here liked what they saw in me? You can't stay afraid. You can't hide behind a mask forever.
It all have meaning. Where Izoi hardened herself, Fudo softened himself. As much as Fudo walled himself off to strangers, he wears his heart on his sleeve around his friend. Izoi, meanwhile, has no one she had considered a friend to open up to. And once Fudo finally cracked through to Izoi, Izoi began to open her heart up. The change is near instantaneous, with Izoi immediately desiring to help out her newfound friends. And by season 2 rolls around, 6 months have passed after the Darkseiner arc. Izoi is now fully part of this friend group and is happier for it. Why I continuously will say that the Black Rose Witch arc ended in season 1 during the Darkseiner arc. But now we reach the tricky part. Defending Season 2 a key Izaoi's arc. I will say that the filler episodes got her consistently right, banger after banger, and I am thankful for it. From the casual reveal that Izoi is top of her class in Dual Academy, to her anger that the vice principal would expel children, to Izoi being deeply concerned when Fudo is kidnapped, even more so than Hogan and Atlas, using her powers to save him, and her expanding curiosity of writing duels, is after Izoi finally gets an episode dedicated to her learning how to do writing duels. The bigger problem crops up is that the writers decided to bench most of the characters. There's not to say that there aren't a few good moments, such as Izoi and Fudo's writing duel, where it's casually revealed that Izoi is practicing all the time, or the fleeting moments that show the friendship between the gang off screen. And I will say that the biggest problem that crops up here is that Izoi and Fudo's writing duel, immediately after her getting her writing dual license, should have been a full episode on its own, and we should have gotten way more writing duels between all of the characters. The problem arises from how few episodes they had to make this happen, for the record. Hogan's injury happens shortly after he obtains Black Feather Dragon, meaning that Izoi now joins the team in place of Hogan. This happens only 4 episodes after the end of the Crash Town arc, by the way, in which Fudo and Kiro are the only prominent characters by sidelining everyone. Crucial development is missed out for every single character, not just Izoi. A note I will make is that at first I didn't exactly enjoy the idea of Izoi asking to be on the team, but the more I consider it in the narrative, the more I'm okay with it. It kind of continues a follow-up that was presented in Season 1, where she says that she wishes to fight alongside her friends. And it also further, at this point, it's true that Izoi was the second place winner at the Fortune Cup, her first ever tournament entry. However, the narrative keeps insisting that writing duels are different from standing duels and thus have a barrier of entry to them. Izoi is new to the format and thus wouldn't be the first person Atlas or Fudo considered for replacing Hogan's spot in the team, and Izoi stepping up to ask to be part of the team is a time to showcase Izoi being vulnerable, continuing her Season 1 desire to fight alongside her friends, as I said, and upon further inspection, it's reasonable. It's reasonable. You can argue it's botched, and I actually agree that it is a little bit botched, but there is a point to it, and I feel like it's a great point that continues from her Season 1 characterization. However, this leads to a critical mistake here in refusing to let Izoi win against Team Unicorn, and I will be fair here. Atlas also is screwed over by this choice as well. The choice was an attempt to build up Team Unicorn as a tough foe, but they were unable to do this by showing Team Unicorn's previous wins with other tournament arcs, again, due to a lack of space. That it's not an issue with Izoi's character, but rather the pacing. By having no other method to build up this new team as a formidable force, they instead choose to have Atlas fail to win against even one of them, and by having Atlas fail, Izoi is set up to fail as well. This is unfortunate, as they will entirely drop Izoi being an alternate writer for the rest of the season, and Izoi will not return to the tournament. And I think more people would have been fine with her losing her first ever writing duel tournament if we got another one where she got to win. The guys all get their chance to shine. You say more so than the rest of them, because it seems the World Racing Grand Prix had this big issue where they just really wanted Fudo to be seen as unbeatable, which is actually to the detriment of Fudo's entire plot line, because the entire thing is going off about how, maybe he isn't strong enough. Maybe he's not strong enough to beat Pacino and friends. But, and of course they had to undo some, but that's not the point of this video. I'm getting off topic. That being said, there are moments during this duel that really wind up mattering. Izoi winds up shaking Team Unicorn so thoroughly that they were certain Izoi was going to win. Fudo's trust in Izoi is reinforced when he gives her Stardust Dragon. Izoi's own skills are showed off when she's able to synchro summon both Black Rose Dragon and Stardust Dragon on the same turn, even managing to keep Stardust Dragon on the field with her last turn. Now, to address the bit I'm divided on, Hogan's attempts to cheer Izoi up after the duel. Hogan's speech in the stub is a rather touching moment, but it does fall apart upon closer inspection. Because Atlas was the former king of writing duelists, it immediately leads to the question of why Hogan would choose to refer to Atlas as an amateur. I mean, besides the fact that he's a baby brother, and that's just what siblings do, I guess. Referring to Fudo and Izayoi in addition to himself makes sense, as none of them are professional writing duelists. Regardless, Izayoi's loss here winds up amounting to nothing. And because, as I mentioned, she's just never given another chance to redeem herself in another writing duel, nor does Hogan's speech about still learning wind up meaning anything in the long run. The single writing duel she has after this is a duel quiz, which shows she's improved and is more capable, but winds up simply being more salt in the wound that is refusing to allow Izayoi further writing duels. In fact, even her duel with Hogan and LeBlanc in the Art Cradle arc isn't a writing duel, it's a standing duel. So, again, that was a very odd choice because all three of those characters are capable of doing writing duels. So it's a bit unsure why they chose to do it like that instead of, having them do a writing duel. Clearly, space wasn't an issue because Bruno and Fudo wind up doing a writing duel, but Izayoi, LeBlanc, and Hogan do not do a writing duel. It was a very confusing choice. Like, yes, the duel that we got with Izayoi and Hogan versus LeBlanc was very good. I will say that. It was a very good duel. But it is a very confusing choice. And here's the thing. Okay, back to my original script, which, because I kind of went off on a tangent there again. I keep going off script and going on tangents. Oh my god. But remember what I said about Izayoi losing her powers not being a bad thing? That's where we hit this discussion. So, during this arc, Izayoi's powers present a problem. She is established as being more powerful than a dark signer with all the powers of a signer. This can open up a lot of plot holes even in the most talented writer's hands, and the writers are now in a bind. By having her retain her powers, it will lead to a flood of cinema sin-style criticism asking why Izayoi's powers don't come up more often. In fact, there was a specific part that I actually thought about this when I was rewatching. So, during Lua and Luca's duel with Luciano, she still had her powers, right? Right. So, at one point, Lua falls off the duel lane, right? And so it led me to think, because, obviously she's on her dual runner, right? And so I was sitting there going, well, why doesn't Aki just make a monster real and save Lua with that? Instead, it had to be done by the Crimson Dragon, which, again, while a very heartwarming thing, still had me going, wait a minute. Why didn't Aki's powers come up here? Why didn't they think about the fact that Aki can just make a monster real and she could save Lua that way? So I do think that choosing to have Izayoi lose her powers is a fantastic avenue to provide new character arc to a character that for most of the season hasn't had much to do. Again, the problem here isn't the idea itself, it's the lack of space for this idea to truly flourish. Izayoi is far too quick to accept that her powers are gone, and there are certainly fans who will claim that this makes sense, except remember what I said about Izayoi using her powers to help people? During the penultimate duel in the Dark Signer arc, Izayoi used her powers alongside Lucas to summon Black Rose Dragon and Ancient Fairy Dragon to keep the city safe from the oncoming monsters. In the second season, Izayoi had used Rose Tentacles to open the truck that held Fudo hostage and rescue him. At the end of the duel between Fudo and LeBlanc, Izayoi used her powers again to prevent a truck from falling onto them before her crash. Izayoi attempted to use her powers to prevent herself from landing on the concrete that caused her coma. Izayoi's relationship with her powers prior to Crashdown had an obvious change, and she was clearly already somewhat aware of the ways she could use her powers to help people. So how does this change anything? I would argue it would make more sense for her for this to be a disorienting thing and for this to be better used as a character arc for the rest of the season, as otherwise Izoi is completely sidelined. With no power she too quickly accepted as being gone and being completely sidelined from doing, Izoi is given little to work with. There's a scene where she is stuck caregiving a child that will be what the writers use to shove her further into a role that ill suits her. Izoi's first offer to calm the child is through a duel that never happens. And I do think this is kind of a relevant point, because when Izoi offers to duel the child, it feels like this should have been a thing. In fact, while I will say that Izoi saving this child without her powers is a solid enough scene, it makes no sense in the grand scheme of things. I would gladly get rid of the scene because it feels strangely out of place, and yet it's the most compelling she is allowed to be. But refusing to allow Izoi to have a low-stakes duel to contrast with Fudo's high-stakes duel is why this scene winds up feeling so strange to me. Like, viewers may enjoy seeing Izoi save that child, but if this was done in Season 1, Izoi would have been having that low-stakes duel with that child to calm her down to contrast Fudo's high-stakes duels. Like, it just makes more sense in the context of the anime in which it resides. And much like everyone who isn't Yusei Fudo, Izoi is regulated to cheerleader, a role that she, like Atlas and Hogan, poorly fit into. I know I said this was about defending Season 2 Aki Izoi, and I'm sorry I wound up discussing the flaws a bit more, and I'm sorry for all the tangents I went off when because as I was reading the script, I realized that I forgot some things, and just started talking. And things are looking up towards the end, though. It isn't until the possibility of Fudo dying in the Divine Temple do we finally get a chance for the other characters to shine, and shine they do. This does, however, lead to showing the glaring flaws done with the characters around Izoi compared to Izoi herself, because Hogan... Every time I remember this, I have to take a calming breath because it is just so... It is just so... Okay, so, leading up to the World Racing Grand Prix arc, right, there's this entire thing where Fudo was working to build a new engine to juice up their duel, because, the better the engine, the faster they could go, the better they can duel, I guess. So, Hogan remarks that Izoi's D-Wheeler was not upgraded like the rest of theirs, and it was a baffling choice, as Izoi was an alternate rider. Why no one upgraded Izoi's D-Wheeler for the World Racing Grand Prix is left unexplained, and it's leaving, this massive plot hole that kind of just makes you think, why didn't the guys upgrade her D-Wheel? Why did they think that she just was not good enough for an upgrade? And it kind of makes them all look a little bit like jackasses for not doing so. Again, this is another thing where, some, pushing Izoi aside really makes the guys look kind of like jerks. It just seems like a jackass thing to do. Yeah, we know you're the alternate rider, but, we're not going to upgrade your D-Wheel. And, it could have been helpful when you were going up against, a stacked team that has had more experience in riding duels than you. But, you don't need that. You don't need that upgrade that we got and you didn't, because, we just like to fucking fuck you over. I really shouldn't have said the F-bomb so many times, but oh my god. Again, it's just one of those things that, once you remember it happened, it just drives you a little bit batty. Anyway, Hogan and Izoi wind up facing up against LeBlanc, and I've already discussed the whole why it wasn't this a writing duel thing, so, let's go into the fact that LeBlanc's entire character arc happened off-screen, and this is an odd choice further compounded by the fact that LeBlanc's explanation winds up making little sense. Izoi, however, oh my god, does she shine this duel. During this duel, she understands everything about Hogan's deck, how it works, and what would best help at certain points, and she has a certain prowess and finesse to her dueling. It's furthering Izaoi's connection to dueling. After all, this is how she's connected further with her friends. And unlike Hogan, Izayoi was able to fully see through LeBlanc's attempts to pit them against each other and flip the tides in their favor. And, of course, the final and penultimate duel of the series allows the bonds between Fudo and his friends to stand out. I know there's another duel, like 2 more duels in the season, but really, Fudo versus Zone is, like, the best and ultimate duel in this, in terms of, like, an ending duel, so we're just gonna ignore the other 2 duels because they're pointless. And so it allows them all to equally relish in the victory, too. That's the best thing about the Yusei versus Zone duel. Everyone basically relishes in this victory because by using his friends and trusted sign of dragons, Fudo is able to win, and it shows that he truly understands them. A moment in this duel I do want to highlight is when Fudo first summons Black Rose Dragon, he activates its board nuke effect, to the surprise and horror of Hogan, Atlas, and Izayoi. However, Fudo then immediately negates his own set card, revealing he understands the best way to take full advantage of Izaoi's Signer Dragon abilities. And it's Izayoi who first realizes that Fudo is safe, and is the one to welcome him home. This is a neat little callback to when it was Fudo giving Izayoi back a home with her parents. All this to say, what to do with those final 3 episodes, because I can't really defend them, so the answer is I just cut them off. I ignore them entirely. They're not canon in my head, and I will remark upon this. Every single character in those final 3 episodes is done absolutely dirty. Like, I was watching, like, the ending scene with Yusei, and how someone was like, this is the perfect ending for him. I'm like, and they're like, it shows that he finally learned self-love, and it's like, no he didn't. Fudo admits that he wants to ask people to stay with him. And he didn't choose to be selfish. He chose to be selfless, and this is not a thing that has changed in his character at all. Nothing about Fudo changed there. This is the exact same choice he would have made all the way back in Season 2. He would have told them to go in Season 1. Like, this is literally, there is no change. There was no change in his characterization there. So, and that's the other thing too, is like, well, here's the thing. Izayoi is the easiest to point to in terms of really random, out of nowhere jobs. Because at least when you point to Atlas and Hogan becoming pro-duelists, when you see Lua become a pro-duelist, you're like, yeah, that makes sense. Luca has not had much to do all series, so of course when they don't tell us what she's doing after everything's done, it makes sense because really no one knows what's up with Luca. But when Izayoi is shown as becoming a doctor, it is definitely noticeable. Like, I don't think Izayoi is hastily written, and she becomes a caregiver is the best ending for her, as Izayoi becoming a caregiver is a huge leap from she's now capable of becoming friends with people. It also feels especially rough when we consider that Izuka from GX is also forced into a caregiver role. Like, so I saw someone suggesting that Izayoi becomes a teacher at the end of 5Ds, and I feel like that would have been, like, extra rough to have 2 female leads become teachers in a row. Like, it definitely would feel very icky. It would feel like, yes, we have typecasted the lead girls, and they are now teachers. They are now all going to take care of your kids. Isn't that awesome? And I would have been like, okay? It also, like, this is combined with how everyone but Fudo is also forced to leave Neo-Domino City, meaning it feels ultimately like an excuse to get her out, not just out of the city, but out of the country. And this is going into another round where I'm just like, were there no medical programs in Japan? Like, it feels rather boring for Izayoi too, because she has literal magical powers. Like, I think if you have a character be a witch and have her get a medical degree to heal people, like, it's a boring thing to do. I'm not even, I think it's very boring. Like, yes, The literal witch needs a medical degree to, like, heal people. Like, I agree, Wishbone. I think that Izaoi's interest in dueling being further expanded upon, allowing her to go pro would be a nice thing for her to do. That being said, I think another solid option is Izoi, upon getting closer to her father, decides to go into politics. Izoi from the jump had strong beliefs she was willing to fight for. I just think that there's something to be said about showing Izoi as someone who is willing to fight for justice. I've seen arguments for realism, but I do have to ask, how realistic is it that an entire friendship group breaks up because literally every single member but one all moves out of the country all on the same day? I do mean all on the same day, because literally, like, when I was watching that Yusei scene, what really got to me was Ushio saying, everyone's moving out tomorrow. I'm just like, oh, so I wasn't off the mark here. It was indeed on the same day. Which, again, just strikes me as very odd and unrealistic, because it's like they're not graduating from high school. If they were, like, graduating from high school together, I could see, like, yes, of course they're all going to just move out all on the same day, because they're going to off to different colleges, maybe, or something like that. But with this, Atlas was a fully grown adult. Hogan was also, like, taking care of children, and, like, he's just up and moving out of Neodomino City. He's done taking care of those kids he's been taking care of for, like, his entire life. You know, we're just all moving out, and, like, it just really winds up highlighting the absurdity of Izoi having to go out of the country for a medical program, of all things. And with that being said, however, Izoi got out the most unharmed over the course of Season 2, with many spectacular highlights, and even allowed to show off some of her earlier development she had. And unlike some of the characters, at least her development stuck. Anyway, now that I've kind of laid out the case for why Izoi wasn't the worst written in Season 2, I'm looking forward to the comments on how I'm wrong. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, share the video, and I'll see you next time. Bye! So, in the process of making this video, the news that Kazuki Takahashi has broke, I was going to put my outfit back on, put the makeup on, and I decided that against doing that. Instead, I just rolled out of bed and I turned the camera on, and I just figured I'd sit here and talk, and I'll edit it, of course, but, like, it's unreal to me that such an influential creator has died like this. And as I'm filming this, they're still investigating his death, and he was found off the coast of somewhere. Where was he found off the coast of? Yeah, he was found off the coast of Nago, Okinawa, on July 6th at 10:30 a.m. And as we know, Takahashi was responsible for Aki Izoi's design. He was responsible for the entire Yu-Gi-Oh franchise, really, by his work was foundational to the series, and without his work, we wouldn't have what we have today. We wouldn't have this community, and I am so grateful that we're part of. Really hard, like, as I'm trying to film this, just say in words what he did for the community as a whole. And again, there's no way to describe just how impactful his work was if we didn't have the foundation of which Duel Monsters sits upon. We wouldn't have everything else, and everything else that comes with it, including the card game that is enjoyed by millions of people worldwide. We wouldn't have this series. We wouldn't have all this, and I genuinely enjoy this series. Like, I genuinely love everything about this franchise. I love the card game. I love the animes. I love the manga that it came from so much so that I am completely indebted to Kazuki Takahashi and all the work he did, the foundational creation that he made, of which we're discussing now, of which we had been discussing for like the past hour now. And I don't know where I'm going to put this in the video. I'm probably going to put it at the end, but as I am filming this as of today on July 7th at 4 a.m., I just wanted to make sure that it was permanently written in the record that I love the work that Kazuki Takahashi made. I love everything he created, and I am genuinely grateful that he actually made this and that we got to enjoy it, and that for a brief moment in time we both lived on the same planet. Thank you so much, Kazuki Takahashi, for everything you created. May you rest in peace, you absolute legend.